Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. This isn't just any episode. We're gearing up for something big next week. That's right, our 100th episode is on the horizon, and we couldn't be more excited. To celebrate this amazing milestone, we're throwing a giveaway extravaganza just for you, our incredible listeners. The giveaway includes a gift card, a cozy School and Around sweatshirt, a mini Keurig to fuel those long school days, and even some awesome Branching Minds swag. It's our way of saying thank you for being a part of this amazing community. Want in? It's super easy. Click on the link in the show notes and fill out our quick entry form by April 15th. That's it. Don't wait too long because this giveaway is too good to miss. Now for this week's episode. Struggling with student behavior and navigating tense classroom moments can leave educators feeling frustrated and overwhelmed. So today we are joined by Erika and Tiffany Burns, authors of Connecting Through Conversation and longtime educators. And they're here to share practical, trauma-informed strategies for building meaningful relationships and de-escalating conflicts. And this is all about empowering teachers to create a culture of connection and support. Welcome, Erika and Tiffany. I'm so glad to have you.
Thanks so much. We are thrilled to be here.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to talk with you today.
Yeah. So I want to kind of give the audience a chance to hear a little bit about your stories, longtime educators and authors. I would love for you to just share a little bit about your experience and kind of what brought you to writing this book.
Sure. So this is Erika, and I've been an educator for over 20 years. I started my career as a special education teacher, and that is still very much where my heart lives and breathes today. I did that for quite a while, had the opportunity to work with students grade, pre-K all the way through age 21, which was such a joy. And then transitioned into administration, had the opportunity to be a high school assistant principal and principal, elementary principal, director of student services, assistant superintendent. I got to do all of super fun jobs. I got to do all the best jobs in my own personal opinion. And now I am the superintendent of a district here in Southern Oregon.
And I'm Tiffany Burns. I've also been in education for over 20 years. I've taught elementary, middle, high school. I'm currently teaching university pre-service teachers, which is just so fun. Erika and I met 14 years ago. And we were laughing the other day calling it principal school. We met when we were doing an administrative licensure program together. And we had just the really great fortune of being able to work on a number of projects together and really spend time with. It was just really lovely because Erika loves kids just as much as I do. And she really, we share that value of being able to really support the adults that serve kids. So when I met her in the program, she also was like the smartest person in the room. And so I kind of made her be best friends with, it's kind of true. So I made her be friends with me. And then we had the great honor of starting our administrative, our first jobs as administrators together in the same district. And so that's been, 13 years. This would have been, or 13 years, I think. For me, this would have been year 10 at an elementary school as a principal. Before that, I was a middle school principal and a K-8 principal. And this year would be year 10, but I took a professional sabbatical this year because Erika and I, like you said, we wrote that book, Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. And we've been traveling all over the country, helping schools and districts and other organizations really build that culture of connection in their schools. And it's kind of hard to do that and be a principal. So this year I've been able to do that work and really dive in, which has been so fun. And then working with those pre-service university teachers.
Well, I am so glad to have you both here to chat about your book and the topics within your book, and specifically just how we can help teachers in this work. Because we were kind of joking before we started that this is the time of year that some of this really comes to head as teachers are like winding down the year, the last quarter. There's always lots of activities and lots of things happening out of routine, which makes sometimes that classroom management so hard. And it very much depends on some of those relationship things that you've built all year long to be successful in this last quarter of the school year. So your book emphasizes the power of connection in schools. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you both to write this book and why you felt like maybe this was a missing resource for educators.
Yeah, so the story of this book really goes back to that period of time as we were coming out of COVID and things were just a little bit different as we re-entered school. And Tiffany had the extra fortune during that time of being in what they call like it was it was a bunch of portables. All of the classrooms were separate. And so we were finding that it was really, really challenging to build connection during this time. And it was really leading to some challenging feelings, right? That's part of why we show up to work. It's part of why we can really make solid progress with our kids, is because we're able to connect with one another. Educators are able to connect with kids, and we're able to have those connections with their families and caregivers. And when you don't have that, it's really, really hard. And so I'm going to say it was kind of a low point. And I was out supporting Tiffany at some point, and she was just talking about that challenge. And we made a decision to really do a deep dive. It was kind of a fork in the road. Are we going to figure out how to get back to that place where we love our work, we love everything we do, and we feel really competent and like we're doing the right thing for kids? Or is this maybe not the right spot for us, if we're being totally honest? So we decided to do a deep thought dive. And at around the same time, Tiffany was really supporting her um, staff with some behaviors that were coming through the doors that we just hadn't seen. They looked different than what we had seen previously. And so someone had asked her, could you just share some of those things that you say, some of those things that you do, just really quick in a staff meeting? And Tiffany did that. And it was one of those like fast and furious, just Zoom meetings, because the staff couldn't gather in the same place at that time. And she's just sharing. She hadn't prepared anything special. It wasn't like a really highly engaging PD. It was just like, here's some information. And she looked up, and every single person was writing it down. And she called me after. And at that time, I was the assistant superintendent, and she was the principal. And she said, this is the book we really need, How to Talk with Kids. And she was talking about this PD that she'd done. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a great book. And in my head, I'm like, well, I can get that for her staff, because that's my job as the assistant superintendent, find the principal asking for. So I get on Google and I'm looking for this book, How to Talk with Kids, How to Talk with Kids. And I'm looking everywhere at Google, Amazon, and I finally texted Tiffany. I'm like, I can't find the book. Who's the author? And she just sends back like all the laughing emojis. And she's like, no, we are. And so that is how it all got started. And it was our own little bit of market research that did not exist. So we went ahead and tackled it ourselves. And it really has been a phenomenal journey. But the piece I want to share with your listeners is, in that work that Tiffany was doing with her staff, what we saw was, as the whole school got on board with these strategies and these tools and these mindsets, behavior referrals came down 36%. Academic achievement in both reading and math skyrocketed. And it was this substantial difference in outcomes based on some of these strategies that are really just, how do we talk and interact with our kids? So that's how it all came to be.
Well, I think that what you you know it's a good PD when they're all taking notes,
Oh
right?
yeah.
It's like, "Oh, that's something I need to practice,"
Yeah.
right? Especially because I do think that, often the longer you teach, the more you're like, "Well, I know how to do this." And so sometimes it's harder to be like, "Oh, wait, here's new information that will help make this easier," especially when you're seeing new behavior from students. So part of these strategies I'm imagining is just how to talk to kids in in conflict situations. So, I know some of your work focuses on the de-escalation strategies. And so can you walk us through maybe one or two specific strategies that maybe you shared with your staff that day, or that's within your book that teachers could use real time to calm down a tense situation?
Yeah. And so I think, what it's, and also that was just really fun to get to hear Erica sharing that.
I told the whole story this time. I
I
don't
love
need
it.
to
No, but
repeat
I'm just sitting here like, yeah, no, okay. Yeah. Kind of laughing over, yeah, that's what happened. Anyway, sorry about that. I think really, really importantly to just start at the very beginning is this idea. Well, I guess there's two. There's really care out loud, but what I really want to or talk about are some strategies for this idea that emotions are contagious. And so
Mm,
what like when Eric and I were writing this book, we really dug in pretty deep into the science. Like there's an art and science of building relationships, and we dug into the science. Like, why is that true? So at the time I was sharing with the staff, like I didn't know all these pieces, but what I did share is just this idea that um, you know, when we're talking with students, we are such empathetic humans as educators. Like, so we're constantly trying to help and trying to solve. And as part of that, we sometimes end up matching their energy,
mm,
right? And so, and what we found is that that is due to we all have these cells in our brains. Eric and I think of them as empathy cells. They're actually called mirror neurons. And what happens is our mirror neurons, when someone else is having some kind of emotional experience or some kind of heightened emotion that we're observing or feeling, our mirror neurons start to match that
mm.
emotion in our own body. Right. So, and we've all experienced that kind of contagion of emotions. Like you might have just been having an okay day and somebody comes in and they're super excited and they're totally jazzed. And all of a sudden you start catching their excitement and you're like, well, I'm kind of really excited for you. Maybe you don't wiggle as much as I do when you get excited, but it's that like, oh my gosh, that's so great. I'm feeling that excitement for you or with you. And the same thing happens as well. Like if maybe you're in a pretty good mood and somebody comes in and they're really grumpy and they're venting about their day and they're really upset about this justifiably upset about something that happened. And all of a sudden you're really kind of angry as well. And you're getting frustrated and upset for them. That's really normal. That means that your mirror neurons are working well. But what we want to do, especially when we're talking with kids, is really be aware of those mirror neurons and being aware of that like actual
Mm,
sensation that's happening in our bodies. And sometimes when kids are having a really big emotional response where it might look like they're angry, it might look like they're really frustrated and they're having kind of, I'm gonna call it like a tantrum sometimes. It's really it's a lot of the time what's under that anger is some real fear and anxiety and stress and worry, and that is so easy to catch, right? Especially if you're an educator and you are in a room full of 20 to 30 odd students, and all of a sudden one starts having a really big moment. It's super easy to catch that anxiety and that worry.
yeah.
And you just are like, oh my God, in your head, it's like, how am I going to respond to this? What am I going to do? Oh my gosh, I've got all these kids. I need to get moving through this content. There's just so many things in your brain that are
Mhm.
happening. And so, what we really talk about is when that happens and you start to catch that emotion, there's no blame or shame there. Just be gentle, have some self compassion, and then unmatch. Like we think about really putting our feet firmly on the ground, getting grounded, really slowing down our breathing, taking some good deep breaths that actually, all the way inhale and all the way exhale. And then it's so easy when students start to get higher and faster for us to want to match them, to match those vocal
Hmm.
patterns. So we purposefully want to unmatch. So when they go higher and faster, we want to go lower and slower and really just start to slow down our speech, talk in a lower tone. Because what we know is that not only can we catch their emotions, but they can
Yeah.
catch ours.
Yeah.
Right. And so we really, especially as the adult in the room, our emotions are the most contagious, right? So the grown up really has the opportunity to set the weather for the space, and they get to set the tone. They're setting the culture. And so when you have a student who's really anxious and the educator starts to catch that and they start getting higher and faster and they start really projecting that anxiety, you've got 30 some odd kids around you that are going to start picking up on that as well. And then all of a sudden you've got, a whole classroom full of anxiety. And so we really need to be intentional about making sure that the emotions that we're putting out are emotions that we want other people to catch. The other tip around de-escalation that I would want to put out there is just this idea that we have to be very careful about when we choose to talk and when we choose to stay quiet. Because when we have someone who's escalated, what we
Mm.
know is any noise at all is going to activate the amygdala, and that's our stress response. And so we get flooded with all of these stressors, and that makes it really, really difficult to do anything, much less learn. And turns out our voice is also noise. And so when we think about what happens to us when we're stressed, this is why when we're driving in a car and we get a little bit lost, or we're in traffic and we're getting a little bit stressed, we have to turn the radio down so that we can see better, right? It's that same idea that we have to be able to lower the volume. So really intentionally, when I have a kiddo who's got a lot of big emotions, I want to stop talking. So we're going to use as few words as possible to get to a safe
Yeah.
place, and then we're going to not talk. Or if you need to give like a very brief direction, use as few words as possible. When I was an elementary principal, I got to spend a lot of time as kids were coming through that de-escalation cycle. And I would just say, I'm here when you're ready. Those 3 words. And then I would wait like 2 minutes. And then I would say it again. I'm here when you're ready. It's just that broken record technique, but being really intentional about putting as little noise in the room as possible.
Oh, that's such a great point because I can think about sort of in my experiences in my early days. Like you would feel like you need to keep talking. You need to like have the because that if you were talking, you had the power, you had the control, right? And that always just made it worse. And so I think, and I feel like I always saw teachers, that maybe had more experience that understood that a little bit. But then you could see everyone sort of had that thing of like, oh, they have to understand what I'm saying. And then so you kind of, it ends up like you're prodding them more, which does not help the situation at
It,
all.
it
And
only
so,
extends and they can't hear you. I mean, that's the other piece. When they're in
yes.
an escalated state, they can't hear what you're saying. And it's educators are fixers. And when we have a kid who's got a big emotion, we want to make that better and we want it to stop as soon as possible. And so we start trying to solve it with our words. It's such a natural instinct. Like this is just a human response, right? We want to jump in and solve the problem. And
Yeah.
all we're doing in that case is really just extending that escalation cycle, which is not
Yeah.
what anyone wants.
Well, and this has to do with that emotional regulation, right? The ability as the adult to be sort of that non-anxious presence, to be able to have regulate your emotions in order to help them regulate theirs. And I think and I can think of different moments in like as you're talking, I'm like, oh, I have, painful moments in my career of like, oh yeah, I was not emotionally regulated in that way. But I think the more you understand yourself, the more you understand your own emotions, it is easier to handle those kind of emotionally tense situations with kids.
Well, and we also just want to normalize, like what you just said, Larissa, I think is really powerful. Like, I think as educators, we're so deeply reflective, right? Which is that is a quality that I always want to see in educators. With that reflectiveness, can also be like when I look back on a situation, like, oh, I'm embarrassed, or I can feel guilt or shame, or like, I wish I would have done that differently. And we're all about, the Maya Angelou quote, when we know better, we do better. And it's all about like not having blame or shame. It's being like, hey, this is some biochemistry happening in your body, right? Like there's a um neurology that's happening with those emotions are contagious. So
Mhm.
it's really trying to like normalize that and then bring awareness to it so that you can intentionally make different choices moving forward.
And I even think modeling that for students can be really powerful, right? The saying, "Hey, I didn't handle that well. I'm sorry." Like that kind of moment. I mean, I don't know how many times I'd had to apologize to students of like, "Hey, I responded really poorly to you. Forgive me, and can we move, and because I think that repair is such a great model for students to understand like that adults are learning to that we all have emotions. It helps them sort of and also feel that like that they're not so alone in that like that or there's not something wrong with them if they have that
We're
emotional
all
response.
Yes, we're all human and we all make mistakes. This is so important. I'm so glad you brought this up. We actually have a whole chapter in the book about how to apologize. We call them like when we have an ASLO, which another stinking learning opportunity, right? Like we made a mistake because we're human people. And when we make a mistake, we have to model that accountability, model what it looks like to take responsibility and what can happen when that's done well. It is so powerful for an adult to apologize to a child. That's something that's really going to stay with the child for a long time. And oftentimes that repair can make the relationship even stronger than it was before that error took place. And when it happens with a whole class, same thing. When you can stand up in front of a class and say, "Oh, I did not respond the way I wanted to. I'm so sorry. This is how I'm going to really work hard to make sure that doesn't happen again." And just going through that process, it is modeling and it builds those relationships in a more connected way.
Well, speaking of relationships, here at Branching Minds, we're all about MTSS, and it relies heavily on those cultivating those positive relationships. So, how do you see that communication is sort of as a foundation for that successful MTSS framework within a school? How do you see that helping?
Yeah, so it is foundational through all parts of the MTSS framework. So we really see this as the underpinning of this work. We see communication as universal design. When we're communicating well with students, when we're responding to their behaviors in a way that shows love and care and also helps teach them to it, bring them to a new understanding, then we're setting up our whole class and our whole school to be responding more positively. And so we see these strategies as really mind frames that overlay any system. It's not we don't have a program. This isn't like, this goes in tier 1 or this goes in tier 2. This is how we respond in all tiers, in particular on that behavioral side. And what we find is when we have that foundation, when we've done a really good job of laying the foundation of connected relationships throughout, and I keep going like this, like people can see me, but throughout that triangle, right? Throughout all of the ways that we support kids in schools, then we have a tremendous impact on the academic side, on the social emotional side, on all of those other areas that we are supporting kids in different ways. And so, what we want to do is make sure that the relationship through all of the tiers, through all of the adults that are supporting kids in school, are strong so that we have that universal support for all of our kids. We're really on a mission to make sure that every single kid shows up to school feeling a sense of care, knowing that they're loved, and feeling as though they belong in the space. And with that, we have what we call connected relationships for learning, and that's foundational to being able to make any academic support with a student. So we really see it as that overlay of the MTSS system.
Well, and
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What we know is that students have to trust us to learn from us. right? And without that strong base of a relationship, they aren't going to trust us. And their learning is risky. Like learning
Mm.
something new is such a risky thing. And as adults, we tend to forget that. Right. So, like, if we try to think back on the last time we learned something new, and I don't mean like a new factoid, or like a new bit of information, I mean like a new skill. Some of us have to go really far back for that, right? And so it's really easy for us to forget how scary that can be. And yet, as educators, this is something that we expect students to do every single day. Like they come in, we teach them, they learn something new, and yet learning something new means that, I have to make mistakes and
Mm.
I have to raise my hand and ask a question. I have to be able to say, I don't get this. Can you talk more about what this means? And if we have not set up an environment where students feel safe, they're not going to take that risk to learn. They're not going to feel comfortable saying, I don't get it, or could you please help me, or what are you talking about? And not only are we asking them to do that in an environment with us as the teacher, we're asking them to do that publicly with like 30 other sets of eyes watching them. So not only do we have to build trust between the student and ourselves, but we have to cultivate again that culture of connection and trust and support within our entire classroom communities. If that's missing, I don't know how we get them to be able to really learn, all of the reading, writing, problem solving, critical thinking. If they don't trust us, it's really problematic. But when they do, oh my gosh, we can take them so far.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point because I mean, I do often say like, if students don't feel safe, they're not learning. And so like creating a safe environment means creating a culture of trust and a place where it is okay to make mistakes because there are maybe students that walk in thinking I can't make mistakes, I can't fail, or even just knowing how to ask a question. Because oftentimes I'd interact with a student and I knew that they were struggling, but they didn't even know what question to ask. So it's like I, as the teacher, had to identify that they were struggling and going, "Is this the problem? Is this?" I had to figure that because they didn't feel like they could actually ask for help or they didn't even know what they didn't understand. And so that building a culture of trust really helps alleviate some of that barrier for them to learn and to ask questions. And you're right, like as adults, we do forget how vulnerable it is to learn. And I'm in a career where I'm learning things, a lot of new things, and oftentimes I do feel that vulnerable place, right? And I feel defensive, and I don't want to ask questions, and I don't, and I can identify that as an adult, but as a kid, you may not be able to.
No, and
Right.
we have, like, as adults, we call it imposter syndrome, right? Like we do.
Yeah.
People get into new jobs or new careers or into, some new part of their career, and they feel really insecure about it and really uncomfortable and nervous. And in the last few years, we've started naming that as like, oh, it's imposter syndrome. And if we think about how that impacts kids, like, oh my word, it, it's a lot. And it's
Yeah.
again, it's really just bringing awareness to that, because with that awareness comes empathy, it comes understanding. And then here you go. Here are all these tools and strategies and tips and tricks that you can use to really help navigate that. And as you said, it's like it's such a part of that MTSS model.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, kind of speaking of the MTSS model, part of it is, dealing with not just academics, but behavior and the social, like it's right. It's all this umbrella. And, here in the podcast, we do have talked a lot about, and we were talking about this before that, a lot of the behavior struggles that students are having. And so, and I mentioned this sort of like that idea of power the power struggle, right, that happens in a de-escalation or just a tense situation with students. And so your work promotes a lot about those avoiding power struggles.
Yeah.
Why do you think that power struggles are so common with student teacher interactions? And maybe what advice do you have for educators as to like how to still steer clear of them?
Well, power struggles are so often about trying to find some control. So oftentimes kiddos are really struggling to get some control. Maybe there are parts of their lives that feel out of control. And so this is a place where they feel like they can find some control. Also, it's a kid's job to kind of figure out where the boundaries are and where the lines are within a classroom and a school. And so they're going to do that. They're going to push, they're going to test, they're going to see, is this a place where I can push a boundary? And as educators, we know like there is no winning a power struggle with a student. There's no such thing. And so we think of it as a tug of war, and our job is to just not pick up the rope. And so the strategies that we talk about are really, how do you avoid getting into those power struggles in the first place? Because they're so frustrating, and they can be really damaging. And so it's just some really simple tricks. I think we can share a couple. The first one that we really talk about is the idea that we don't want to ask a question if it's not a choice. So often educators are so polite, and so we tend to like put please in every sentence, and ask all these questions when what we really mean is, this is a thing that I'm expecting you to do. So when kids walk in the door, it's, oh, you can all take a seat now, as opposed to, could you all please take a seat, right? Oh, could you please walk in the hall? We're not going to say that. Instead, we're going to say, oh, we walk in the hall. Thanks for walking in the hall, right? We're just being very clear and direct with the expectation, because otherwise, the thing is, if you ask a question, as a child can very justifiably be like, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. Right. Like a totally appropriate answer if we've asked a question. Right. And we have to think about, for when we have really young kids, like we're not going to say to them, oh, do you feel like going to bed now? No, of course not. I've never met a 4-year-old who feels like going to bed or brushing their teeth. We're going to say, oh, time to brush our teeth. It's time for bed, right? Like we have to be really clear with our expectations. So just that idea that we're going to be clear with our expectation and not leave space for folks to say no, if it's not actually a choice.
Well, and Erica, will you add the piece about okay?
Well, I mean, the other thing that educators have a tendency to do is turn a statement into a question. So it's time to line up for music. Okay. And we don't want to say an expectation. It's time to line up and then turn it into a question by adding that okay at the end. And again, it's just like educators, we tend to be really, really polite. And so we talk to folks in a way that, that doesn't always make our expectations clear. So yeah, really avoiding those questions.
Well, and then this other idea of when we can give choices, we do it, right? So when students are, just like Erica said, it's so often that they're really trying to find their own control, and they're wanting control and some agency in a situation. And so when we can give them that and it works for us, we want to do that. We want to do that as much as we can. So, you know that kid that is not coming in, this is for elementary folks, but they all know the student that I'm talking about. It's the kid that is not coming in from the playground at recess, right? And so like they just want to stay outside and play. And so it's not a choice whether or not we come inside after recess, right? But what we could say to that student is, oh, it's time to head in. Would you like to walk by yourself, or do you want to hold my hand? Right? Like we're giving them, here's two choices. So you can either walk in alone, or walk in by yourself, or you can hold my hand and we'll walk in together. And those are just two choices that both work for me. They give the child some bits of control. And then all of a sudden they're thinking about, like, their brain's like, oh, well, I wonder which one of these things I want to do. And they stop thinking this thing about whether or not I want to go inside. Now, that only works for elementary kids. That would be super creepy for older students. So like I don't recommend that for middle or high school students. But that could be like, hey, it's time for you to head to the office. Do you want me to walk with you, or would you like to walk alone?
Yeah.
or just like, this assignment needs to be completed today. Do you want to complete it now during class time, or do you think you want to come in at lunch and do it then? Right. And it's just like, here are two choices. Here are pieces um, that will both work, but it's again, it's working to give them those bits of control. I love a timer in a classroom. I think timers are just, I as a principal, every single classroom had a timer in their rooms, and it's just a really helpful
Mhm.
tool. And so let's say you have a student that needs to take a break. The break is not an option, right? But you're saying, hey, it's time to take a break now. I'm going to set the timer. Do you want 7 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Either one of those is fine. And say you say, do you want 5 minutes or 10? And the kid comes back and says, well, I want 7. Cool. No problem. Let's do 7. Like, that's not, I don't need to get in an argument about that. It's like,
Yeah.
that works for me. Sure.
Yeah. I think it's I think providing them options, providing them choices that you're okay with is such a great, like, it's just a small thing you can do to give them agency in their day, when so much of what a student's day doesn't have their own, that isn't about their own choices, right? And I'm thinking of like middle school and high school students. Often I encountered this, is that, they had to go to class, they had to do the assignment, all these things that really they didn't necessarily choose to be there. And so, or they didn't even, like, they didn't choose to sit by their friend because this class has assigned seating, all these different things. And so I always sort of had to be like, if I could give them different choices in the day of like, you guys can, today you can sit wherever you want, or, things like that, provided them some agency over their life or over their day that maybe they didn't have before, and helps them learn how to make good choices too. I think there's sometimes where it's like, if we never give them options, they're never going to be able to learn how to make choices that are good for them. Even just like, hey, you can sit wherever you want, but just remember, like, you can't talk to your friends, or whatever, helping them learn how to make those choices that are good for them. So
Yeah. And at the
yeah.
root of so many power struggles, again, is that quest for control, the real desire to control their environment. And so if we can give that to them in a way that's supportive and works for us, then they're not going to try and get it in different ways. So yes,
Yeah.
offering choice where we can is hugely helpful in avoiding power struggles.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, the power struggles that teachers have, I think that work can kind of burn them out a little bit, especially when they're facing a lot of these challenging behaviors. So how do you feel like applying your communication framework helps educators sustain that energy and passion to be in the field long term?
Well, I really believe, Tiffany and I both believe, that at the very heart of education is connection, and that's true so that students can learn, but it's also true so that we can find joy in our work. I could not do this job if I didn't feel connected to my colleagues, to the educators I get to work with, to the students, and to the community, right? So finding that connection for me is how I got back to a place from kind of a dark place in my career where I'm like, why am I doing this? Right? Like, this is really, really hard work. And I had to double back down on connection. And we oftentimes hear, like, I don't have time, I don't have time. And what I really encourage people to think about is, if you spend the time, which is limited, it does not take a lot of time to build these really strong relationships. If you do that up front, you're going to lower the behaviors in your classroom throughout the year. And nobody went into education because they're like, oh, I know, I want to go in and really deal with student discipline all day long. Like, that is not a part of our job that we tend to look forward to. And that can really push us to a place of frustration. And, we start to question our own competence, and it can really lead to burnout. And so by laying this foundation, by really setting up an environment that is supportive for the students, but also for you, you're reducing student behavior, and all of a sudden you can find a lot more joy in your work. The other piece that I really encourage educators to think about when it comes to just sustaining and that connection is two things. One, I'm so fortunate that I have Tiffany as my work bestie. Having that person who is confidential, supportive, and positive that you can lean on when things get hard, when you're struggling with a student, when you're struggling with a situation, and you're really trying to work something out, having someone you can go to is critical. We also really encourage folks to find that group in your school that is going to help make you a better version of yourself. Um, we've kind of geeked out lately on neurosynchronicity and this idea that you become like the five. I think the quote is, you become.
You are the average
Like,
of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
thank you. That is the one I'm
Jim
going to.
Ron. I got
Yeah.
you. I got
Yeah.
you.
And really for us, we say that's, in schools, you are who you eat lunch with. Like the folks that you spend the most time with when you're not in the classroom, like that is going to be what is making you feel really good about work or more of a challenge. So when you think about, okay, when I walk away from this group of educators, do I feel better? Do I feel lifted up? Do I feel supported? Or am I feeling a little bit more grumpy and negative than I did when I walked in, right? Because those
Oh,
emotions are contagious and there are pockets. There's pockets of excellence and then pockets of just kind of negativity in almost every school that I've been in. And so think about who you're spending time with. Because that is going to make a huge difference in how you feel showing up
oh,
to work.
yeah,
Yeah.
Well, and
yeah.
Larissa, I really appreciate you asking that question about burnout. We've been doing a little bit more research just on that recently, and it turns out education is the number one most burnout profession in the United States, which, you know, I guess I felt that, but like seeing that actually written out, like as an actual statistic, was really eye-opening to me, and in some ways affirming of just like, yeah, this is a really, really hard job, and so just really, again, it's that intentionality and it's that awareness like, wow, this is a job that is very susceptible to burnout. And what we know is, after the pandemic, like we've always had students that had different behaviors, right? We've always had students in our classes that have been challenging. But then post pandemic, and I say post pandemic like we're out of it, but we're still dealing with the impacts of it. You know, we it seems like the behaviors that we're dealing with have, or that we're really trying to manage and support, have grown exponentially. It's
Hmm.
not just a few behaviors in a classroom, it's a lot. And that absolutely contributes to burnout. And that for Eric and I was such a huge piece of like, of creating this as a resource. Like we wrote a playbook for educators because it's not fair to say to somebody, well, yeah, this is a really hard job. And yes, those behaviors are really challenging, but figure it out, do better. Like that's not fair. Like that's just not fair.
Well, and that doesn't make me want to stay anymore, or like, take care of yourself. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So it's
Don't
like,
get a pedicure. No.
yeah, oh yeah, self-care, right? In some ways that becomes really, really upsetting and in some ways invalidating to how hard we are working and how hard we are trying. And so like Erica said earlier, we are on a mission to ensure that every single student in every single school feels this culture of connection. But in order to do that, we have to equip the educators with the tools and the strategies and the mindsets
Hmm.
to be able to do that so they really can go make the big difference that they want to make.
Yeah. I love that you said that. And I had one more question, but I feel like that's a great place to end because I mean, it sounds like both of you are doing that hard work and providing a tool, providing a resource for educators. So I'm excited to share that with our audience, but I also am excited to provide them a place to connect with you all, and sort of learn more about your resources. So how would they connect with you?
The best way is through our website. So we have all kinds of things on our website, connectingthroughconversation.com. And you can find our blog there, which is a great free resource. You can get connected to us on social media, and we send out free resources all the time. We have a whole bank of resources on the website that, again, are completely free. You can connect with us, of course, through the website we love doing professional development in schools and districts. We have some great book study packages that we do for folks. And we also have this new online course, and Tiffany is the one geeking out on that, so I'll help her.
Well, so it launched on Valentine's Day, which I love that part. But we travel all around to different schools, and what we hear frequently from district leaders or building leaders is, "Oh my gosh, this is great, but I don't have even 2 hours to be able to dedicate to professional development throughout the year for our support staff or even for our teachers sometimes," which I get. Like, time is such a precious resource in education. And so folks kept asking, do you have like an online recorded resource? And we can finally say yes now. So we have this online course that we've developed. It's 5 to 15-minute lessons, split into a number of different lessons, but there's about 2 hours total of content. And people can purchase either individual licenses or site licenses. But the idea is that it's just like little bite-sized turnkey PD that you can use really flexibly for an entire staff. And we've got like discussion questions and ways to really reflect and to kind of build capacity within a school with this idea of this can help you build that collective efficacy in a pretty fast way.
Yeah. And I think that you also have something a special you're going to share with our audience.
Thanks for reminding me, Larissa. Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody wants to do a site license, they can reach out on our website, and there's a pretty significant discount. But for individuals, we're offering $50 off that course. So they just put in the code CTC podcast, CTC, like connecting through conversation podcast. And that'll get them $50 off for being a listener of your show.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and I'm so glad that we got connected, and excited to share your book and your resources with our audience. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. This was super fun. Appreciate it, Larissa.
Thanks for having us. This was really fun.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.